So Adventure was a really popular product, and we were there was some vibe around maybe a sequel to Adventure. And somewhere in there, I got the idea of doing a series of games that were contests with comic books with real prizes made by Franklin Mint. We were part of Warner Communications, and somewhere along there we had started to be doing bits of comic books with the games, and because Warner Communications owned DC Comics. Warner Communications, I happen to know, I don't know that anyone else was paying attention, also owned Franklin Mint, right? Franklin Mint being a collectible company. I don't know, you know, they made plates and little figurines and stuff, I know, and medallions, and not my scene, but you know, it's a creative world. It's hard to talk about this without going me, me, me. I don't love going me, 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 but a lot of it was, I consider myself to basically have been the showrunner of Sword Quest. The concept was mine, the literary concept, the material. So the games are actually moderately literate and erudite, right? The whole story is put together as a lot like a Grail quest or something in Joseph Campbell. It would be a hero's journey, a spiritual evolution, a life. It's a story of a life, of a energetic, a magical life, right, through these mystical systems. So I embedded it in a lot of historical culture of mysticism, and sold the idea, and it went over big. You know, it was brave, it was ambitious, it was audacious, and it had a certain je ne sais quoi, but I don't know what it is. You know, I'll back up a little bit. There was kind of a bizarre effort to do a combination of Twitch and adventure game, to merge and to create an action adventure. I think Howard tried this in Raiders, right, where he tried to make an adventure game that was built into an action game and merge the two. So I consider Howard and I to be some of the pioneers of action adventure. Got to say this in a certain way. So you'd play this action game and maybe get a clue, a prize that you'd add to your inventory. And if you had that in your inventory, then you could unlock, then you'd be on this map. You wouldn't necessarily see the map, but you'd be inside a maze, and a door would open in the maze, and there'd be another action game there. And so it was kind of like a first-person adventure with action elements. That was basically, and you know, looking back at it when I say it that way and knowing what was in the times, it was very audacious. And it was actually very creative. It was really, you know, it was really cool.
The 5200 was a tragedy. The 5200 was a good idea gone horribly wrong.
The big problem that we had at Atari, the thing that killed the industry more than any other one thing, even more possibly than the E.T. video game, is that it was the first product life cycle. No one had ever been through a major success video game console life cycle. So where does it end? Nowadays, when somebody comes out with a new system, they already are designing the next system because they know the life of a system. They know a console is good for a certain number of years, and then it's going to die, it's going to fall off, and that's when we need to be ready and prepared to come in with the new system. Holy crap, you know, our first machine is finally falling off the cliff. We need something. We have something. We can take the 800, 400, 800 computer, repackages the 5200, spit it out, and we can do it.
So the 5200 was basically what the 400, 800 was going to be 3 years before. It's a tough business. Business is cruel. And you know, like I say, I'll say it again, it was the first time anything was being done. No one knew.
And what happened was the Atari 5200, it grew very large because marketing wanted perceived value, so bigger was better in some respects. And then marketing got really focused on the Intellivision, and Intellivisions had a bunch of buttons. They had a keypad, and they had this disc with 12 distinct regions. And so, hey, if we put an analog stick here, and one that doesn't self-center was the great idea, this will be a better marketing message than the Intellivision controller. And of course, it was a horrible experience. The company lost focus on what was important, and it was gameplay's important. You know, good games sell, bad games don't. If you've got a bad control mechanism, doesn't matter how good the graphics are. It's not going to be fun to play.
Now what do you do? So, and that was the thing. Engineering we really wanted to do something cool, right? We wanted to do like a real next generation because the 400, 800 was already last generation.
The engineering team and the creative team, the game designers, we were so upset, and we all felt that we were making a wrong decision with this controller, that we put together a petition to upper management, and we just explained that, you know, this is a great product, the control is lacking, we've got some other alternatives we want you to see, and my name's number 3 on the list of the petitioners.
See, I wasn't someone who signed petitions so much as talked to people behind the scenes, because I always felt that was more like the way you operate in a corporation. And but I definitely put the word out whenever I could that, like, you know, this is something we either should have done a few years ago or, you know, can't really do now.
We told marketing, hey, we could make this 2600 compatible. They didn't want anything to do with that. They said they must be very separate and distinct. We can't have backwards compatibility, which at the time we thought might be a great feature. It's a good way to get people that have these Atari games already and keep them on the Atari platform instead of giving them an opportunity to jump to another platform. And so we designed the product specifically so that you could never have 2600 compatibility. About 2 months before launch, they demanded 2600 compatibility. And at that time, we had to build an adapter. And then we actually had to modify consoles that were already made, the first ones, to work with this adapter. And we called this thing the piggyback parasite. We were just horribly embarrassed by that situation. That never should have happened.
There was some big time denial, around Atari, because nobody wants their parade rained on. And when it's the best parade you've ever imagined in your life, nobody wants to see a cloud. You just don't want to see it. So we didn't. When you have a tragedy, and I do believe that the fall of the video game industry in the early 80s was a tragedy. It was a tragedy to many, many people. It changed a lot of lives.
I think it's pretty obvious when it comes to the video game crash that Atari didn't have control over the quality.
I mean, it needed some sort of way to keep just anybody from writing cartridges for it.
And so many people saw this video game gold rush, and they just, started dumping crap. I remember going into KB toy stores and just seeing, really bad box art and just really just terrible looking games. And that's when I started losing interest, and the market became flooded just with garbage. And it ultimately led to, of course, things like E.T. being, actually buried in the desert like garbage.
And what happened was that E.T. became the face of the crash of the video game industry. And I, of course, was the butt behind the face. That's kind of the way it went.
Greed and hubris, that's what undid Atari. If they just had worked more from a place of focusing on making great games and delivering great games to the customer instead of how can we maximize revenue, I feel like they'd still be a huge powerhouse today.
Frankly, Warner did not understand technology. They didn't understand the consumer marketplace, the video game, and Ray Kassar, I think was afraid of releasing new product because it might not be as successful as VCS. So that's a sure way to fail.
I regret that we didn't have a new console by '84 that would have made it so that Atari continued to be a really viable business.
We never, ever got down to ever having any process by which we could come up with a better system.
Even to say, I think people do believe that if they just released the 5200 earlier, or if they released the 7800, or they had done different things, they would could never have they would have survived the crash a lot better, and they would be a powerhouse today. As a kid, I didn't know much about business, but I just felt like something was wrong.
No one knew anything. Certainly no one knew how to replace an existing console with a new one.
The real one-liner about why the game industry crashed and went away is that it was a first product life cycle and nobody knew what to do.
There's this funny time period in the history of, if I wrote a book on the history of the video game industry, there's this funny time period where we had left Activision and we went from this fabulous AAA office complex, beautiful. We had more space than we needed by a factor of 5, and we went to the most horrible office in Midland Park, New Jersey, in the basement of an optician's office. Game industry, this was after the crash. Game industry was a disaster. And it was just, oh man, what an office. It was horrible. But we survived in it. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. So anyway, we're in this horrible office and we're doing C64 stuff at that point. And I get a call from a buddy of mine. Actually, he was our part-time sales guy. And he always visited Toys R Us, and he knew them really well. He called me and said, you know, you're gonna laugh, but they want to know if anybody's doing 2600 games. Because at that point, there were none. Nobody was doing them.
But there were 26 million consoles in homes.
And people were going in Toys R Us saying, why don't you sell games for my Atari anymore? So I said, wow, that's interesting. How many would he buy if he had a 2600 game? He said, oh, you know, 20, 30,000 pieces probably. And I said, all right, I'll get back to you. So we did Title Match Wrestling and Super Skateboarding, first 2 titles. I mean, regular skateboarding, first 2 titles. And he loved them and they sold like crazy. And at that point in time, we were the only people in the world making games on the Atari 2600. My phone rings and it's the Tramiels. I saw you did some 2600 games. You know, do a couple for us, because word got around. There's actually a need. And then Activision calls and says, do some 2600 games for us? And I said, well, why don't you guys just do them? He goes, well, you know, if I could be completely honest with you, we don't have anything. We don't have the specs, we don't have manuals, we don't have the equipment. He said, we couldn't make a 2600 game if we wanted to. So could you make something for us? I tell people that, they're like, who the hell wanted 2600 games? You know what? No one told consumers that there had been a crash. No one went to their house and said, you don't like video games anymore. Because that's what Toys R Us and Walmart said. People don't like video games anymore. But the people at home were sitting going, God damn, I'm tired of combat. Isn't there something else I can play on this machine? So it was good. We had a great run there. We made a lot of money off those games.